Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Fraternity Foodie. This is Mike with Greek University. And of course, there is nothing like food that brings people together. So we're going to be continuing to tackle some of those really tough conversations in these interviews at Fraternity Foodie. And we're also going to get the inside scoop on what our guests like to eat and where we can go to get it. So stay tuned to the end of the conversation in order to get that great foodie information. So today we have with us Robert Wilson. Robert is a speaker for Greek University, and he also leads the diversity strategy development for Culture Shift team in Nashville, Tennessee. So welcome, Robert.
Welcome. Glad to be here.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. So let's get started. I know that you had some experiences related to the topics of diversity and also inclusion as an undergraduate at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. So can you tell us a little bit more about your experiences as an undergraduate?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, so when I was an undergrad at University of Michigan, I served in now what's called a diversity peer educator role. And what that entailed was working with all students in the residence hall to increase awareness and to facilitate discussions about diversity and inclusion. But as well to work with ethnic minority students to develop and produce programs that gave those students a sense of place within the greater residence hall community. So it was a really fun role and a great role. It really helped me grow quite a bit as a person, but it also helped me understand a lot about what inclusion means. So it's a really good opportunity.
Excellent role, and I'm sure that had a lot to do with retention at the University of Michigan. That was a big retention piece for those students, so an excellent initiative, certainly. Also, I know that you were the first director of diversity and inclusion for Nissan North America that happens to be based right here in Franklin, Tennessee. What was it like taking that role for the first time for Nissan?
Yeah, you would have thought that it would have been very easy for me because I'd come from doing that type of work in a university setting, but it wasn't at all, to be honest with you. I was trained. My degree was in engineering, and so I did a lot of work within the business side of the company, with the engineering side of the company, not so much with the HR side of the company. So I had to learn a lot about what inclusion means in a corporate setting, in a large multinational organization. So that meant really looking at mission and vision and aligning things like mission and vision from a diversity standpoint with the mission and vision, of the organization, and really looking at, what's the business case for this and how is this going to actually help the organization reach its goals and achieve its objectives. So, that's the direction that I came at it with. I'll tell you though that the other thing that I had to remember, and this is where maybe the experience at Michigan helped me a lot, was that, diversity and inclusion is ultimately about people. Right? And that, we had to do a lot of work to make sure that people felt like they were being heard, and to make sure that people, like every employee, no matter where you come from or what your background is, to make sure every employee felt like they were a part of this initiative so that everybody would join in. And I think, frankly, once you have that understanding of how it fits, within the goals that the organization has, and once everybody feels like they've got a seat at the table, then you can really make some real good strides, and you can start to have everybody pulling in the same direction and make some strides. And fortunately for me, I was able to do that, and we were able to have some real success with it.
Wow, such a great experience! I'm telling you, I'm jealous. That's really incredible.
It was easier said than done.
That I believe. That I believe is very true. So living here in Tennessee, I think if we're honest, we'll probably say that Tennessee is not generally known for their diversity efforts. I mean, I'm a New Yorker, coming from New Yorker, that's very commonplace. So what initiatives are you seeing in both the Tennessee Diversity Consortium and also within the Culture Shift team here in Nashville? What are those initiatives looking like?
Yeah, so I'll start with the TDC, the Tennessee Diversity Consortium, because this is an organization that I started about 7 years ago, actually. And it was started, because people doing diversity work in Tennessee, we didn't know who one another, we didn't know who the players were. We didn't have any kind of real network set up for us. And a lot of us were like me, coming from, roles where you didn't necessarily come from an HR background, or where you had a background that might not have aligned it so perfectly with doing D&I work. And so the TDC works to educate both the people doing the work and the greater community on issues around diversity and inclusion. So, all the big companies, all the universities, other educational institutions, not-for-profits, consultants, all participate in the TDC. And we take on all different types of topics. We've taken on topics ranging from gender identity to topics around veterans diversity, as well as, looking at some of the traditional areas of diversity like gender and ethnicity. So we've kind of had a really broad way of looking at it, so that we're able to take those initiatives back to all of our organizations, no matter what kind of organization it is. We feel like rising tides lifts all boats. And so we've created a really strong community of people doing the work in hopes that that will help, drive change at all of our organizations. Now, with respect to Culture Shift, and the Tennessee Diversity Consortium is an initiative of the Culture Shift team, which I lead. And the Culture Shift team is aligned in a lot of the ways that I've described so far. We help organizations integrate diversity and inclusion with sales, growth, and loyalty. And so we help organizations find a way not only to learn more and educate and create awareness around diversity and inclusion within their organization, but then also to translate that into, if you're a nonprofit, how do I better serve my clients? If you're a corporation that sells things, well, how do I better connect with my customers? And how do I connect with maybe some markets that I haven't connected with in the past? So that's the work that we do. And we do the Tennessee Diversity Consortium. We lead that as a service that we provide back to the community to help make the community stronger.
Okay, that's wonderful. So if a college student is listening to us right now, what's the best way for you to define what diversity and inclusion is? Yeah.
That's the first question I always get asked when I do diversity work. People always say, "What is diversity? What do you mean by that?" Right? So they usually say it like that too. It's like very confrontational. So thank you for asking that in a nice way.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the first thing to think about is, I always try to expand people's thoughts and attitudes about diversity first, right? And so that means looking beyond traditional areas of diversity like gender and ethnicity. I always try to break through that first, because it's important that everyone feel that they're a part of what we're talking about when we have conversations about diversity. So, the first thing is that it expands beyond just race, ethnicity, and gender, that things like disability status, LGBTQ status, things like where you're from, things like your socioeconomic background, which I know, in a college setting is something that really plays a big role in the community and environment at a university that oftentimes doesn't get talked about enough. But all of those and many, many more things like language also are part of, what we talk about when we have a conversation about diversity. So usually I start there with people to let people know that, hey, all of us have something to contribute to this conversation. And so all of us, can speak to it and speak into the conversation that we need to have about diversity and inclusion.
I love the way that you talk about diversity and inclusion. We've had some opportunities to sit down over coffee for, an hour or more to talk about this issue. And I feel like that's why it resonates with college students when you talk to them about this, because it's just very disarming. I mean, it's easy to talk about diversity and inclusion, and we start talking about things that make people uncomfortable. We start talking about things like quotas and other things that all of a sudden people start getting very defensive, and they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. But I think there is a way to talk about it where we can make everybody in the room feel included in this conversation. And it's an important one. So I appreciate the work that you're doing with the Tennessee Diversity Consortium, certainly, and also Culture Shift and Greek University, and on and on and on. If let's assume we have college students that are listening right now, which I do think that there are, in your mind, what is the value of having a more diverse organization? Because to be quite honest with you, coming from an IFC background, I'm certainly working an awful lot with Panhellenic organizations. These are predominantly white organizations. So if we had to have a conversation with some of these organizations and we said, listen, I think it's important to have a diverse organization, what's the reason why?
Yeah, so I think it really speaks to the second part of the equation, which is the inclusion equation, right? The inclusion part of the discussion, right? So why does being more inclusive matter? I mean, so first of all, we know that our college campuses are changing dramatically, right? And that the level of demographic change is happening within our university campuses does matter, right? The other part of it is, from an inclusion standpoint, is that the more people, the more different inputs, the more different ways of thinking about things, the more different backgrounds that are represented in your organization, the stronger your organization is going to be. The more reflective your organization is going to be on campus, the more of a leadership organization you're going to be able to have on your campus by being more inclusive. But you got to organizations have to make a decision that they want to be inclusive, that inclusiveness matters. And that's really where it begins, is that mindset around being more inclusive and how that plays out in kind of your everyday environment. The reality is that even in an organization it doesn't have perhaps a lot of demographic diversity, right? Even an organization maybe that has a lot of similar race, or maybe an organization that is very similar with respect to gender, there's still a lot of diversity in there to be inclusive of, right? So you may have brothers or you may have sisters that are LGBTQ, right? So yeah, they may be ethnically not as diverse, but you also have things like sexual orientation to consider. And I know for a fact that a lot of organizations are grappling with some of the socioeconomic diversity components, right? And so people in your organization that come from a lot of money and maybe don't come from very much money, right? And so are you being inclusive of them? And are you building an organization where people, no matter, again, where they're from, feel like they have a part of that conversation, feel like they're being listened to, that they're being heard? So when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we're talking about how we make our organizations stronger, how we help our organizations accomplish their missions is really what it comes down to.
Yeah, I love how you slice up diversity. I'm also noticing the same trend that you're noticing, which is that college students today, they understand that some of them are coming from a very high socioeconomic background and they have a lot of money, and they're conscious about the fact that there are some students on their college campus that won't be allowed to join their organization because they don't come from money, and they're trying to bridge that gap. They recognize that there's a problem here and not everybody can be in a fraternity and sorority, and they're trying to figure out how do we make it more accessible. So I like that. I like that I'm actually seeing, the wheels turning, and they're saying, okay, what can we do here? So what's your advice to them? How can some of these, whether we say predominantly white organizations or predominantly high socioeconomic background organizations, how can these organizations on college campuses, once they make the decision that, yes, we do want to become more diverse, how do they actually implement that? What are the steps that they need to take?
Right. So, again, the first thing which you talk to is the commitment, right? So it starts there. And it starts with making that commitment, because once you make that commitment, there's an educational component that has to happen. And I think, we realize that more and more people are realizing now that there are things that our brains do, for instance, that are things that we're wired to do, which sometimes hurt our inclusiveness, right? So, things like bias, which is a very natural thing that humans do. We're tribal. Humans are tribal creatures, right? And that's how we form organizations when we get to campus, right? We kind of identify our tribes is what we kind of do. And that's very natural, and that's okay. And there's some real strength that's come from doing that. But we have to realize that because our brain because our brain is wired to do that, that can sometimes lead to things like bias, things like not understanding privilege, all different types of privilege too, and things like microaggression. Those are just three examples of areas in which our brains just kind of do stuff before they ask permission from us, right? And those things can hurt us. So a big part of, if you look at step by step, is making the commitment. And that second part is about educating yourself and taking the time to say, you know what, maybe I've got some work to do. Maybe collectively as an organization, we've got some work to do to ensure that these things, which I call diversity derailers, are not prohibiting us from being more inclusive, not getting in the way of our inclusive, of the mindset that we want to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with that commitment that you talk about, because certainly you were right in the earlier comments that you had. Our college campuses, they're getting much, much more diverse every single day, every single semester. And quite frankly, organizations make better decisions and faster decisions the more diverse that they are. So if we want to be successful as a student organization, pick any student organization that exists. It doesn't matter. whether it be a fraternity and sorority or any other organization for that matter. If you want it to excel, if you want to make the best decisions, if you want to make them the fastest, if you even want to predict the future, you have to have a diverse organization. It's just so critical, especially now that there's a lot of first-gen students that are coming to college campuses for the first time. They might not know about what fraternities and sororities are. So, for example, my parents were both from Israel, different country of origin. They had no knowledge of what a fraternity and sorority was. So I think, that's going to be important as we try to attract more and more students to our organizations, is that commitment that you talk about.
Absolutely.
But, in reality, I think that a lot of students tend to shy away from these types of difficult conversations when we talk about diversity and inclusion. So how do we overcome our fears about talking about it in public?
Yeah. I think, we have to be courageous, number one. Number two, I would tell any college student, look, it's, avoiding talking about this during college, it's not going to go away when you get out of college, right? I mean, this is still going to be something that's a heavy factor. I don't know, sometimes, I think when I was in college, I thought, well, once I get to the working world, then some of this stuff, it's not like that at all, right? It's even more prevalent, And so college is the time to have these conversations, right? That is an environment where, you should be exploring and you should be, having some of these conversations. So I would really challenge students to take advantage of this opportunity, especially, given, the demographic diversity that you'll see on campus that will prepare you to be able to be more effective, when you go out into the working world. So, there's no silver bullet there. It doesn't necessarily get easier, as you move and move through your career, but it is important that you take this opportunity now to go in and explore those things.
That's wonderful advice. Hopefully all of the people listening will take you up on that advice. I think that's excellent. Listen, we're living in challenging times. There's racism. Certainly we can say that with 100% certainty that's out there. The climate right now, I think with fraternities and sororities is one where I'd say that very high alcohol and drug abuse, very high sexual assault happening on college campuses. Hazing is something that's prevalent, not only in fraternities and sororities, but even in athletics and things like that. So given all of these problems, right? I mean, you see them every single day. What advice do you have in terms of students overcoming some of these obstacles that are on college campuses? Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, I would say, one of the big things is authentic vulnerability. Let me just keep moving here so I can.
Turn on the lights.
All right, we're back.
Lights are back.
Yeah. Okay. So the piece of advice I give is this a concept that's called authentic vulnerability. And what that means is just being cognizant of creating a space to where people can be themselves. Right. So that's important. So that what you talked about with respect to being able to have a conversation, I think is critically important. Right. So that's the first thing, is learning and testing out your own skill set to be able to have these conversations. The second part of it is being able to, what I call is give it and receive it, right? And so being cognizant and educating yourself about areas of diversity and inclusion, especially the inclusion part, and learning about bias, learning about privilege, learning about stereotypes and microaggression, what kind of impact those things have, so that you are prepared to have these conversations. But then the other part of it is, especially, for students who come from groups that have traditionally been marginalized, the other thing is how you manage when people do slip, right? And so one of the things that I've always heard is a term that I love is calling people in versus calling people out, which I think is important for students to understand. And that is, when people make mistakes, but their heart is clearly in the right place, being able to step aside and have that conversation with them and say, hey man, you might have gotten this off, man. That thing you said today, here's why it might have been a little bit off, as opposed to using every example like that as an opportunity maybe to escalate issues. So I really think, de-escalation, giving it and being able to, I say like the good behaviors and help people in this educational process, I think is really important. I always tell people too, Mike, that, you don't have to, be the next big thing when it comes to diversity inclusion. You just have to think about your own behavior and the area that's around you. So for our students that are in fraternity sororities, if you just focus on yourself and your organization, right? Focus on how I can get better, focus on how I can help my organization become better, you've done your job. If everybody does that, we get a campus community that's, much stronger, much more diverse, and much more inclusive. So, you don't have to be a hero, I tell people. You don't have to be the hero. You don't have to be the hero of the story, just be the hero of your story, shall we say.
That's excellent advice. I hope every chapter president, I hope every executive council for every fraternity and sorority in the country takes that advice. Now is a great time to do that right in the beginning of the semester when you're first getting together with your brothers and sisters again, maybe after the Christmas break or holiday break, whatever, and just have a conversation and talk about diversity in your organization and what we're actually going to be doing about that. Are we going to be reaching out to other groups on campus that we don't know? Maybe we'll invite them over for dinner and just have a conversation. Or maybe some of these recruitment events that we're going to be doing this semester, maybe we do them in a place that's different than where we've been going before, because you know what? The results haven't really panned out the way that we've wanted them to pan out in the past. So we're going to try something different. I think all of these things are important, and just starting the conversation, like you said, not being a hero, but just starting the conversation and seeing how we can make steps in the right direction. I don't think that any of these issues, whether we're talking about racism or, we're talking about anti-Semitism, for example, or we're talking about, sexual assaults, whatever, all of these problems, these are real problems, but the only way we're going to fix them is by talking about them openly and honestly and trying to find solutions together, which is really where I think you're headed. And I appreciate all the work that you've done so far, and you'll continue to do, I'm sure, on college campuses. So, of course, this is Fraternity Foodie. So my last question for you is, what's your favorite meal and where can we go to get this favorite meal?
I love Thai food.
Okay.
Any meal that's got some calamari in it, I'm going to love. And so my favorite restaurant right now, if you live in Nashville, my favorite restaurant right now, I'm going to give them a little bit of a shout out, is Eastern Peak. So I eat there almost once a week, and they know my face by now. I eat there so often. So if you want to get some good Thai food, some good Asian fusion food, that's where you need to be.
I love Thai food. Thai food is so good. Like I grew up on Chinese food, but it's just, it doesn't have enough spice. It doesn't have enough depth for me. And so my favorite is also Thai food because it's got that punch. It just like punches you in the face as soon as you eat it. And I love that. So I'm definitely going to have to check it out. I'm going to go hit that restaurant. Maybe we can have lunch over there, or if not, I'm going to do a full report on everything that I ate over there and let you know. That's great. All right. So Robert, where can our audience go in order to learn more about you and also connect with you? Where can they go?
Just go to Greek University. Go to our website and check us out. And you can read a little bit more about what my interests are and what I do. And hopefully I'll be able to see some of you out on your college campuses or maybe somewhere else real soon.
That's excellent. So the link is www.greekuniversity.org/Robert in case you want to check out his presentations that he's giving on college campuses all across the country. And I know Robert is going to be with me at all the various conferences this February. We're going to be at NGLA. We're going to be at SEIFC. We're going to be at AFLV Central. So those are all great opportunities to meet Robert in person. I'm his biggest fan. We've only known each other a short time, but I can certainly say for everybody, at least on the team at Greek University, we're all grateful that Robert is with us. I think our team is way better because Robert is with us. And I just want to tell you that I appreciate you. So thank you very much for everything that you do.
Love doing it. Love doing it.
And we have a lot of fun together. So that's another good thing. All right. So thank you very much to the audience for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you on an upcoming edition of Fraternity Foodie. and bye for now.